the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Happy Scientist Podcast. This is the place to be if you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and today we will be drawing on the wisdom of Mr. Kenneth Vogt, the Bitesize Bio team coach and founder of the executive mentoring company Vera Claritas. Today, and in other Happy Scientist podcast episodes, you get to benefit from his Yoda-like words of wisdom to help you increase your performance, enjoyment, and success in the lab. Last time, we talked about how to cope with the parts of your job that you don't like. But today we're looking on the bright side and looking at all of the things there are to love about the lab. Okay, Ken, tell us about the things, all of the things there are to love about the lab.
Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen here. And I didn't give Nick any heads up on this, but Nick's going to tell you a lot about the things to love about the lab. But I'm gonna lead him in, and the reason we're doing this is kind of as an antidote for what we were talking about last time. Because the fact is that there may be things that you've hated about your job, but there are lots of things to love about your job too, and sometimes they get forgotten or lost or hidden behind the things that have bothered you. So being reminded of all the good things that are available to you in the lab can be very helpful to you. It changes your focus. And it's a productive thing to do, to look at the things that are working for you, the things that are supporting you. And realizing, if it wasn't for all this stuff, you wouldn't be able to do what you do. And the possibilities for what you could achieve would be so restricted. And if you think back in time, you don't have to think back very far. It could be, hundreds of years, it could be decades only. It could be even single-digit years. There are things you can do today that you couldn't have done even a few years ago because of all the supports that are there for you. So we're going to look at a couple different ways of seeing what's beneficial in the lab. So I want to put some stakes in the ground. So we're going to talk about the structure of the lab, the things that are available to you in that way. We're going to talk about the mindset of laboratory work and scientific work. We're going to talk about the history of the operations that you may be working with. And we're going to talk about the future that's available to the operations you work with. And so within all those things, there's a number of different things that are supporting you. So let's start off by talking about structure. And to begin with, to my mind, an obvious thing is equipment. When I was a kid, when I thought about science, I thought about Bunsen burners and test tubes. But now...
Once I took my two cousins they were a lot younger. They were much younger. I was doing my PhD and they must have been about 8 or 9 or something like that, maybe that age. And they were begging to come into the lab, so I took them in one Saturday so they could have a look around. And they were really disappointed that there were no bats, as in flying mice.
Oh boy.
I think they were watching some Dexter's Laboratory or something like that. And So it's an interesting that you would start there with what's good about. I suppose you're talking about the lab, not being a scientist. So things to love about the lab, the equipment, the machines that go ping, as Monty Python used to say, and we used to say that a lot. It goes to the kind of the root of your day-to-day life as a scientist at the bench is that you've got lots of technical, you need to build up lots of technical know-how and ability. You need to know how to use various pieces of equipment and use them well, and that those pieces of equipment and the reagents that go into them and the concepts behind them are increasingly build increasingly on increasingly complex ideas and inventions, and so that you have so much power. You have generations of deductive power, if you like, at your fingertips in a lot of those machines, or not so much the machines, but in some cases machines, but on other pieces piece of equipment. That's an exciting thing. You get to wield that. Even doing running an SDS page gel, a relatively simple technique. That wouldn't have been possible unless you had without the generations of chemists and who before, in the early days of molecular biology and so on, they figured out how to do that and package it in such a way that you can just run it off, multiple gels a day. It doesn't take you, weeks to set the whole thing up and, figure it out and everything like that. That sort of thing, standing on the shoulders of giants, is what kind of excited me in that regard. But then you have the technical challenge of getting to grips with it, being able to do it well, being able to produce reliable, use them reliably and well, and then teach other people, which is also, for me, a great part of it is being able to spread that know-how.
Well, I think you're making a really good point that you got to invest in these advantages. You got to put your time into it. You got to gain some skills. You got to bother to learn how to use certain things or to learn about the availability of things so that you can love it. I never even heard of reagents or assays before Bitesize Bio. When I did hear about them, I was like, holy cow, I had no idea that what could be out there. Then I learned about some things like pipettes that I thought, okay, I can't believe there are companies there are multiple companies that are, making millions and millions of dollars because these things, while so small, are so important. And so, they're so useful across the board. So, you've got that available to you. You didn't have to reinvent that wheel. Fire's already been invented. It's done. And you get to use it. So, in adding on top of that structure, and this kind of ties into what you were just saying, Nick, there are things to learn about it. Well, where do you learn about things? Well, you learn about things from people. And so the fact is you have other people you can draw on. You may have, a PI that that is really helping you. And you may have a lab manager that's just been there, done that. You may have colleagues that are willing to share their experience. And that again is extremely helpful. And that can make your job so much more enjoyable. That you have people to work with that are teaching you things, that are willing to help you with things, and well, hopefully you're doing the same thing for others, because there's a saying, there's more joy in giving than in receiving. So you can be part of that personnel structure that is making the lab such a good place to work.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that in virtually all scientific sort of settings or scientific research settings, you're working in a group or in a community even, depending on what the setup is, where everyone can learn something from each other, because there are a lot of techniques to go around. There are a lot of things to learn, and helping each other is the fastest way to propagate that, and doing it on a quid pro quo basis. So you are helping each other it's quite an unusual situation to be in, because in the world in terms of jobs that you could be doing, is that it's literally learning all the time. That's your job, learning how how whatever it is you're studying works, or whatever your objective is. Learning how to add more and more, kind of bring in new techniques, get them to work better, what's happening in other areas in the field. You know, what are other people's research showing, and so on. You can help each other. You can help people every day, and that is really binding. You know, it can be a really binding experience and make it really worthwhile, depending on how you look at it. You can go in and be hung up on the experiments that aren't working, the people who are annoying you, that you don't click with or whatever, the fact that you feel isolated in your lab because you don't have, you know, your direct, the people directly closest to you aren't, you know, in your lab aren't supporting you, but you can always go wider. You know, you can go wider and go into other labs and support and get support. You can go on the internet and get support. There's
Go to
all sorts of
bitesizebio.com and get
Bitesize Bio and get support. That's why Bitesize Bio is there, to provide a layer of that. But that is, for me, is one of the special things about science is that it's people who have, you know, they're in there for different reasons, but they're all pushing for the same goal, and that goal is it's a big, well, understanding the world and the universe. That's kind of the biggest goal there is, really. And you know, it's a specific angle on understanding the universe, but everybody's pushing for that. And you know, that's quite a place to be if you look at it like that. And sometimes stopping and looking at that wider picture helps the gripes that you have about individuals to melt away a little bit when you take that wider perspective.
Right. So, we've been talking here about the advantages of the mindset in the lab that make it a good experience. So let me just put a few bumpers around that, areas where you can see it. For instance, it's great to have management. Now, and at some point, some people are like, man, I hate having a boss tell me what to do. Really? Do you really hate that? Or isn't it good that there's somebody that's taking on that responsibility and covering that stuff, and they're going to those meetings you don't have to go to, and they're worrying about the funding, and they're worrying about stuff so you don't have to worry about it. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't do that. You could. You may be well qualified to do that, but it would take you away from the parts that you really want to do. So having that management structure there is very useful. Nick, you talked quite a bit about the opportunity for collegiality in the lab, and I think of course there are people that are competitive. That's true in any field, but the collegiality of science is renowned, and it stands out compared to many other fields. And so you're very fortunate to have that collegiality in this business that you may not have if you were in a different business. Another thing that's useful, as you've talked about, is the codifying of things like objectives and procedures and methods. The fact that it's already been done, that it's been written down, that there's a structure there that you can draw on. You don't have to reinvent that wheel. There's a safe way to do X. There's a clean way to do Y. It's already been figured out.
Everyone else already did the mouth pipetting, so you don't have to do it.
I don't have any experience in the lab with that. However, I used to work with somebody who was a chemist, and he talked about experience that he had where this was when he was still in university, and he was mouth pipetting something, and it was some kind of bacteria. Now, it was a bacteria that wouldn't necessarily hurt you, except he pretty much ingested a 1,000 times what any human would normally encounter. And, he took it into his mouth. So he literally grabbed some nearby acid and put it in his mouth and burned his mouth. It's like, holy cow. And he said, but I didn't know what would happen. He said, but you didn't know what would happen with the acid either, and it was fortunate. It was I guess it was a lung-borne a bacteria that might affect your lungs, and he took it into his mouth, but he apparently didn't breathe enough of it in that it even got him sick. So, but he did have to deal with having burned his own mouth.
Well, now health and safety would not allow you to even get into anywhere near that situation. So
Well,
there's a good reason for
this guy,
to
looking
be.
back, he's the kind of guy who would have broke the health and safety rules to do the kind of garbage that would have got him into this fix.
Yeah, but you would if you tried to pipette bacteria in the lab, about 10 people would jump on you and stop you. Now, where it was,
Well, that's
you know, I
good
mean,
to
the
hear,
culture, the
actually.
cult. It's not just the health and safety. It's the culture has changed. Oh, yeah, and yeah. So that's my experience of it anyway. Is
Well,
that people are
that's good to
more
hear. 'Cause
so.
it's hard to imagine how dangerous a lab could be if there wasn't this kind of protocol in place, you know.
There are certainly a million ways to kill yourself or someone else in a lab, as to be said, or permanently damage.
There you go.
But anyway,
Yeah, there's one other thing about mindset I wanted to comment on too that you have, even with all the restrictions of procedures and methods and protocols and 10 people will jump you for doing the wrong thing, you have a freedom in the lab which is not common in many other fields. You have to, if you're in engineering, you're not allowed to think outside of the box hardly. I mean, you're really swimming upstream if you try to do that. Whereas in science, you're encouraged to think outside of the box. You're applauded for thinking outside of the box. Now, and I'm not saying that doesn't come with some danger, as it were. It is riskier, but at least you get the option. You have the option to be free.
yeah, I mean, literally, your job as a scientist is to creatively ask questions about biology, in this case, an aspect of biology, and these procedures and machines and equipment and reagents are tools that you use, and there's, as you said, Ken, there's codified ways to use them that help you to get better results with less risk to yourself or others. But the bottom line is that your job is to solve problems, answer questions, and especially as a young, when you start off, depending on the lab you're in, it can feel quite restrictive because you're told what questions to ask and how to ask them. But as you go up as you earn the right to do so, you increasingly get more and more freedom to do that. But even as first first day in the lab, you have more freedom over to exercise, to express yourself than you do. I went from stacking cans on a shelf. There's not much freedom in that because you're told what to do and when to do it and what has to be done. And then you go next day, I have a problem to solve and I'm told basically how to do it, and then I get on with it and start learning. That's a big jump in freedom, and it's important to appreciate that.
And the one thing that's come to mind for me lately, because there's been so much questioning of science, and you think, well, science is about questioning, but that's just half of the equation. You question so as to get answers. The answers are the important part, and you're the ones who get to come up with the answers. It's pretty cool.
It's certainly yeah. That's a whole other episode. But
Yeah, it
yeah,
is.
but bottom line is that you are in you're inside you're doing this, you're operating with freedom, but inside a structure that has been created for you over decades, that mean that you can, that things can move faster than they ever have. Yeah, again, just look at where the tools were to answer these questions 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and see how how advanced how advanced how advanced the tools at your fingertips actually are.
Yeah, well, that segues into the next thing I wanted to talk about. That is the history of all this. And so it's the history of your lab, the history of maybe the institution your lab is associated with, the the other associations you have that your lab may be linked to other labs. Those associations go back for decades or even longer. and there's a lot of depth there, and there's a lot to draw on there, a lot of foundation that you can build on. Another thing, it's almost a dirty topic for some people, but the funding, it's money that matters, to quote the old song. But the fact is, a lot of funding has been put toward science. I mean, literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And without that, you wouldn't have been able to do the things you've done, and the things you've built on wouldn't have been
It's
there.
interesting because the whole, as a rebellious 20, 30-year-old, the my I kind of, I don't know, bristled against that the whole funding aspect, and all the structures, and all the as you've written there, the legacy, the associations and so on, the history that's there. But actually looking at it, you need money to do this work, right? These questions need to be answered, or it's in all of our benefits to answer these questions. It's science is an imperfect tool, but it's the best we've got. The way that science is organized, to date, is the best that we've got. You can criticize, say where it's good and where it's bad, where it works, where it doesn't, but it's the best we've got. You need money to go in there, to flow in there to make that research happen, to fund it. That's the best system we have. So the money's got to go in there, and the management and the associations and all that are what help to make sure that the money goes to the best possible, flows in the best possible way for the outcomes we want, using the imperfect systems and tools that we have at the moment. So, it's, again, I'm talking to my younger self, as you often do end up doing with these things, but it's just, it's all there for a reason. And, just because you can pick holes in the methodology or the structure of the setup doesn't mean that there's a better way to do it.
Right. And some of the funding is driven by, call it, capitalistic um, outlooks, which is often focused on, what have you done for me lately? What have you produced this quarter? It's pretty short-term thinking, but it's short-term thinking at the end of the line. It's like, how do we now create something practical that can enter the marketplace? But there is plenty of funding happening for basic research, for things that are not looking for a direct product at this moment, that are foundational and can be built on. And that is not true in much of the rest of the world. When it comes to where money gets spent, it's we don't usually spend money on things outside of science that don't have a direct line between investment and return on investment. Whereas in science, it is not only acceptable, it's considered to be a necessity that there has to be at least some of the research being funded that is that kind of basic research. And those of you who are involved in that kind of research, God bless you. You're doing amazing things that we don't even know what's going to come from it. But we do know that when you do it, the next person along can look at that and go, I can build on that. And I mean, it's happened over and over and over again. So, I think about easy example in my mind is CRISPR. The basic research that happened before CRISPR became possible, we didn't even know why would you want to know that? Why would you want to map the human genome? Why would we bother with that? Well, guess what? Now we know why we bothered with it.
Well, all of the I mean, geez, if you take it back, the research that was required to allow CRISPR to happen, it just goes back to extremely basic research. Very basics of, the molecular biology of a cell. For example, and the chemical techniques that were, invented to explore that molecular biology. It goes way back, because you tend to think of, well, the stuff that enabled CRISPR the research that enabled CRISPR is the stage before it was invented, but it's not. It goes way
Oh,
back.
yeah, yeah.
So and it's important. It's maybe an obvious thing, but it's an important distinction to highlight to yourself. I think, regardless of what you're doing, it's just patiently adding to the building blocks that we know, and then we see what happens. But I still don't think that it's easy to decry that capitalist-funded research as well. That's also, I think it's a common thing that is decried, and I think that again it's an imperfect system, but it's the best that we have to make certain things happen. So I think it's all good. That's the and it's all the best approach that we know of to do this stuff.
So in the show notes, Nick, you commented on where I mentioned associations and legacy, but I mean them as two different things. Associations I meant more as like your lab's being associated with another lab, or perhaps associated with a hospital, or with a cancer research institute, or something like that. That's what I meant by associations. With legacy, I mean your lab. Your lab itself may have a legacy. Your lab may be the place that first developed X. You might have been the lab that first developed CRISPR. I don't know, but that legacy is very valuable. It's very.
What about if you were the person who taught one of the people that made the key breakthrough in CRISPR? What if you were the person who taught that person how to pipette?
Right.
I mean, it's all. It's easy to focus on the people who are at the top of the pile there, but there's so many people underneath them that are equally as. I seem to be in kind of a some sort of I don't know. I don't know what the word is. Some kind of love and peace mode at the moment.
Well, some people, they want attention. They want their name associated with something. Other people, they really don't care about that. That's not the part that's valuable to them. They're glad they got to participate in it, but if nobody knows they participated, they're still satisfied about it. And in some ways, that's a lot easier. If I have to be known for my association with CRISPR, that's a much higher bar than just having the self-satisfaction to know that I was part of what made it possible. By the way, I'm not applying this to me personally right now. I had nothing to do with CRISPR.
Definitely not.
So history is the past, but now let's talk about the future. Because of the lab that you're associated with, there are all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of opportunities that are available to you. And maybe they're available right now. There are things you can do. There are maybe new assignments or new roles that you could take on, or maybe they're years down the road, but they're going to be there because you're already associated with that lab and you're putting in your time now. And once you've done that, well, then the next phase will open up for you. So there's so much future that comes out of the lab that you're associated with. And it doesn't matter if your lab is world renowned for something or if it's just toiling there in the darkness, because, there's still output, and that output gets fed into the rest of the system. And, again, it comes down to, what do you want to be a part of? Maybe you like being in the background. Maybe you want to be in the forefront. Well, you can choose accordingly, and you can assess where you're at right now, what your lab is like for that. But if it's hitting on the things that matter to you, awesome. Make sure you take note of that. Have some gratitude and appreciation for what's available to you, what's in front of you, what you're able to build on top of, and you're going to be a lot happier. And we want you to be happy as a scientist. So that's basically my wrap up for today.
I would just say in closing that one of the things that the ways that we've approached this today is taking different views. It's really easy to get, you're working in the lab every day. You walk the same route to work or drive the same route to work. You get in, it's the routine. Boom, 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 boom. that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is the really zoomed out view of what, your tiny part in this huge endeavor, and then everything in between. And those different views help you to, it's helpful for me anyway, to, it's helpful to look at it from all these different directions, to see what there is to be, excited to be part of, and what the benefits to you of being part of that are as well, and that just helps to float all boats for me. That kind of approach.
Yeah, I'm grateful and appreciative that I get to help a bunch of scientists do things that I can't do. It's amazing.
Me too, because I can't do those things.
Well, there we have it.
So, okay, thank you very much for listening in. And again, that's a good episode. Thanks for dropping that on me, Ken. That was interesting.
Yeah, thank you. You stepped right up too. Well done, Nick.
Thank you. All right. Before we go, a reminder to look at bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist for all of our other episodes. This is number 49, I think. So there's lots of stuff in there to look at if you're just joining this podcast, especially, and you enjoyed it, you think it might be useful. If that is you, then we would encourage you to go back to episodes 1 to 9 to look at those podcasts that talk about foundational principles like human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which are quite useful tools to have in your toolbox for increasing your enjoyment of life as a scientist and your effectiveness. And the other last piece of housekeeping is to, if you enjoy the podcast, head over to facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Club and join us there, and that you can connect with us and let us know what your woes and what you're grateful for and all that stuff. And we'll see you in there. So again, thank you, Ken, for a great episode.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all again next time.
Bye now.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.